Two more Tigers hit the portal, and one is a big surprise. We'll talk about it locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked On LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We're free, available wherever you get great podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. And as always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. Thank you for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. Another day has brought two more LSU Tigers declaring their intention to enter the transfer portal: quarterback Colin Hurley and offensive lineman Carius Curne. Now, Hurley's probably not a great surprise, but is impactful. Curne is not only surprising, but disappointing. We'll get to him here in just a quick second. Let's start with Colin Hurley. And I mentioned that this isn't necessarily a great surprise because, like we learned in November, Colin Hurley hasn't even been with the team for personal reasons, as Frank Wilson mentioned.
He took a leave of personal related matters. It is temporary right now at this time.
So at that point, they weren't sure if Colin Hurley would return. But if you remember, Emil Picarella, the preferred walk-on, was on the travel roster for the Alabama game at the beginning of November. Colin Hurley didn't make that trip. A week later is when Frank Wilson made that announcement. But, Hurley is going to be one of those fascinating test cases whenever, all is sort of said and done, because this is a guy who, was a super talented quarterback for the class of 2025, reclassed for 2024. So he enrolled at LSU in January of 24 at 16 years old. He was a 4-star, one of the top 20 quarterbacks in the country, and was an elite 11 quarterback. As a matter of fact, he was featured in Seth Wickersham's book, American Kings, a biography of the quarterback. If you want to check it out, it's a great read, and Hurley is a big piece, and his story is a big piece of that, being a sort of the child prodigy coming up. So the point being, you have this guy that's supremely talented, but his time at LSU is going to be defined by what happened off the field instead of on it. Of course, Hurley showed up as a 16-year-old, went through spring, then, of course, was a backup to Garrett Nussmeier and Ricky Collins in 2024. And at the end of the 2024 season, LSU played Baylor in the Texas Bowl and won it. And then shortly after that bowl game, Colin Hurley was involved in a horrifying car wreck. As a matter of fact, Seth Wickersham, who wrote the book, was on my radio show and disclosed that he's very close with the Hurley family, disclosed that Hurley was actually put into a medically induced coma. Initially, they were wondering if he would live. And then it was, would he live a normal life? And then because he's so young and strong, he survived. And then he went to rehab and had to relearn to walk, relearn to throw a football. So it was stunning that he was there with his team, surprised everyone on the day of the spring game. And then, of course, was back in time for fall camp, which was in some parts miraculous. And I don't mean that hyperbolic. I mean, he went from going to therapy to relearn to walk to actually playing football again just a few months after that. So this year for Colin Hurley was a backup to Garrett Nussmeier and Michael Van Buren, as we know. But then in November, of course, personal matters, he took a leave. And this is probably best for Colin Hurley, an opportunity in his life to hit the reset button and find a new spot, maybe close to family, that can be a better support system for him, and we'll see what the future may hold for Colin Hurley. But as you look at it for LSU, from LSU's perspective, this leaves you in a terrible predicament. Now, no one was anticipating Colin Hurley being available for the bowl game anyway, but this means you have Michael Van Buren starting the bowl game. Remember, Juwan Johnson is entering the transfer portal, but has said, and he told me on my radio show this week, that he will play in the bowl game. So if you're in a bind behind Van Buren, you do have Juwan Johnson available to play quarterback in the Texas Bowl. Not that that's at the top of anybody's priority list, but Van Buren Juwan Johnson for the bowl, and then Emil Picarella, who we mentioned. And, I'll continue to say this about Picarella. He, if you're not familiar with his story, early in his high school career, around his sophomore going into his junior year, there was a point where Emil Picarella was a top 10 quarterback in the country for his class. And some reason along the way, throughout his junior into his senior year, the star rating and the rankings fell, and he ended up having G6 offers, but his family are LSU people, and he went to U High right on LSU's campus and wanted to play at LSU, so he accepted the preferred walk-on opportunity with LSU. So Picarella's a guy that I understand the air quotes stigma that goes along with being a walk-on as opposed to a scholarship quarterback, but that's a guy with good size and good ability. And they thought well enough of him to have him as the backup opportunity late in the season when Nussmeier was unavailable. So one may be worth keeping an eye on just as we talk about depth, but what it does illustrate is that the portal is an absolute must, not only for your starter, but you've got to go get depth in the portal. So this is probably going to be one of those portal classes where you sign 2 quarterbacks. And we've seen LSU sign those types of guys before. A.J. Swan signed out of Vanderbilt knowing he was going to be a backup. Certainly just this past year with Van Buren, he was signed knowing he was going to be the backup to Garrett Nussmeier with the opportunity in 2026 maybe to be the starter. Now it certainly remains to be seen if Van Buren will be the starter in 26. I think that's doubtful. I'm not sure it's certain that Van Buren's on the roster in 2026. At this point, from a numbers standpoint, you kind of hope he is. Maybe he can compete, if nothing else, provide depth. And so you get 1 plus Van Buren and then maybe Picarella. So you'd have 3 in that sense, but the numbers are thin. And even you just saw this a year ago at Ole Miss, where they had Austin Simmons back, but they brought in Trinidad Chambliss for depth, and Chambliss ended up being the starter. So work to do for Lane Kiffin and his staff at the quarterback spot, no doubt. Again, not necessarily surprising that it's gone this way with Colin Hurley, considering all of the off-field stuff. But now that it is confirmed, it does leave LSU in a numbers bind. Best case, I think, was Hurley could rejoin the team and provide you some depth as far as a scholarship quarterback, and who knows, maybe flourish under Lane Kiffin, but clearly that won't happen as Hurley's going to go into the transfer portal. The one that was the surprise on Wednesday was Carius Curne entering the portal. I'll give you some thoughts on that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. NFL Sundays move fast. One big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. And with FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into the moment. Live spreads and money lines adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scorers, drive results, totals, so much more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. FanDuel, the game moves fast, and so can you. Today's show is also brought to you by Omaha Steaks. The holidays are here, and whether you're hosting family, you're planning the perfect gift, or you're just trying to keep things simple and delicious, Omaha Steaks is making it easier than ever. From effortless holiday entertaining to unforgettable gifts, Omaha Steaks delivered the world's best steak experience straight to your door. And what makes it even better, with Omaha Steaks, you always know exactly what you're gifting. USDA certified tender steaks, premium proteins, gourmet sides, and decadent desserts that make anyone feel appreciated. It's become one of my favorite last-minute gifts because it feels thoughtful without requiring any stress. And you can save big on gourmet gifts and holiday favorites with Omaha Steaks. Visit omahasteaks.com, and for an extra $35 off, use the code COLLEGE at checkout. Terms apply. See site for details. That's omahasteaks.com, promo code COLLEGE. And finally, we're brought to you by Our Lady of the Lake, championship health partner of LSU Athletics. When Baton Rouge calls, champions answer. As Coach Kiffin takes the helm, energy is in the building, excitement is in the air. but next season's work starts now, behind the scenes, every day, on and off the field. As championship health partners, LSU and FMOL Health, Our Lady of the Lake providers, are in the huddle, keeping students and teams healthy, supporting campus life, and preparing everyone for what's ahead. From checkups to training to day-to-day care, the focus is on giving their best when it matters most. As Coach Kiffin settles in and our city welcomes him, one thing is clear: the next play starts now, and Louisiana is ready. FMOL Health, Our Lady of the Lake, and LSU, championship health partners. Learn more at ololrmc.com/LSU. It wasn't just Colin Hurley. Carius Curne, the big former five-star offensive lineman, also declared his intention to enter the transfer portal. And this one stings because the LSU offensive line was much maligned this year. It was the worst position group on the team. I don't even think that's debatable at this point. LSU was 88th in the country in sacks allowed. They were 120th in the country in rushing offense. Now, I'm not going to put 120th in rushing offense solely on the offensive line. That's backs, that's scheme, that's commitment to run, as we've talked about. But certainly the offensive line deserves their fair share of the blame. So however you cut it, this was a terrible unit. The worst unit on LSU's team this year was the offensive line. But within that unit, there were bright spots. And I don't think there's any question even that Carius Curne, among the young players, might have been the brightest of the bright spots. So when you look at Curne, he comes to LSU as the number one player in the state of Arkansas. He was the number, in the composite, he was the number 2 interior offensive lineman in America in the Rivals composite, number 49 nationally. Now, On 3 alone rated him as a 5-star, the number 28 overall prospect in the country. So you're talking about a giant human, 6'5", 320 pounds, 5-star. He was an interior offensive lineman as a recruit, but LSU looked at him. They loved his physicality. They loved his athleticism and decided to play him at tackle. As a matter of fact, Brian Kelly, early in Curne's time at LSU, when he got his first significant playing time in late September, Brian Kelly was asked what he liked about Curne.
He reminded me of Emory Jones as a true freshman. If you remember, Emory technically was not very sound, but he was, fighting for dear life and was really active, had a lot of hustle errors, but he's hustling and playing physical. It's just, it's hard to be a technician at this point. So we're going to take what we can get from him, and that's hard play, physical play, can move some people.
Remind you that Curne really spent all of fall camp at left tackle, and then 2 weeks before the Clemson opener, Curne was taking first-team reps in place of Weston Davis at right tackle. Davis really struggled throughout fall camp. That, of course, manifests throughout the season. And they put Curne over at right to try to push Weston Davis, which tells you what they thought of him, even when they had more veteran players. Tyree Adams was on the left side, but you had guys like Ori Williams and Ethan Callaway and Bo Bordelon. You had veteran players, and still they looked at Curne and were like, that's a guy we think has tremendous upside, and they got him involved early. So Curne ends up playing in 7 games with 5 starts. His first start, as you might recall, came on the road against Ole Miss. Weston Davis was concussed by Jack Pyburn in pregame, broke his nose, suffered a concussion. So 15 minutes before kickoff, Carius Curne realizes, I'm starting on the road against a top 10 Ole Miss team at right tackle. And he goes in there, and it was a day that was not very good overall for LSU offensively. But Curne was LSU's highest graded offensive lineman in that game. He ended up grading out, his pass block was an 80.3. His overall grade was a 63.9 in his first start, and that was on the road against a top 10 Ole Miss team. And remember, they had the option. Remember, it was the week before against Southeastern in the second half when DJ Chester was flagged for targeting. So Chester was unavailable at the time. It's hard to remember this now, but remember, DJ Chester was kind of like the 6th man. Anybody went down, he was the next guy in. Well, Chester was unavailable for the first half, so Curne had to start. Well, at the start of the second half, Chester was available, could have gone in at right tackle, they decided to stick with Curne. And I asked Brian Kelly that Monday why.
Because what we saw in the first half, essentially, I think if there were major issues, Matt, Brad and I would have probably made a decision there to make the change. But we felt like Carius was giving us good energy. He was protecting our edge really well in the passing game. There were a couple of mistakes inside out, which we expected that was going to happen. But by and large, we felt like let's let the young guy play. And that was kind of our sense.
So you can tell the arrow was pointing up for Carius Curne. Now, he did not play in the finale, the regular season finale against Oklahoma. And would presume now that he's going in the portal, he will not play in the bowl game. But as you kind of look and assess this offensive line, there's a couple of different ways that Lane Kiffin can go. Look, you're bringing in Eric Wolford as a new offensive line coach. Brad Davis will be out, and you're going to have a new concept. And I've shared this with you before, but Ole Miss, remember I told you LSU is 88th in the country in sacks allowed. Ole Miss was tied for 21st. In 12 games, they allowed a total of 16 sacks. There is nobody on that Ole Miss offensive line that's as highly rated as the guys on LSU. I mean, Carius Curne was a 5-star. Weston Davis was a 5-star. You have guys that have played a ton of football, top 100 overall prospects. Skill, size, ability, rating, ranking. LSU is more talented than Ole Miss. Ole Miss played better. Why? Coaching, scheme, development, all of it. So Lane Kiffin is going to have a decision to make because he's going to look at this offensive line unit. Now, Thompson is out of eligibility. Curne's entering the transfer portal. You're bringing in 2 freshmen in Bryson Martinez and Ryan Meeret out of Miami. But you've got all these other guys who have played a lot of football for you. Braylon Moore, if he comes back, which I think should be the number one priority, recruiting Braylon Moore back. Cohen Eccles, Davis, Adams, Chester. You have all these guys that have taken a lot of snaps for you and took a lot of snaps for you this year. So, I mean, just if you look at the overall snaps played now, Josh Thompson led the offense with the most snaps played this year. But after Thompson was, if I'm just looking at snaps, so Thompson played the most, he's gone. Weston Davis was next. Then Cohen Eccles, then Braylon Moore. I mean, that's any offensive player. So you have guys like that who played Tyree Adams, 463 snaps. Curne, who's leaving. Chester played 291 snaps, started every game a year ago. Paul Mabenga played 244 snaps this year. My point is, Ori Williams, come back. Point is, you've got a whole bunch of dudes that are talented, that were highly rated, that have played a lot of football. Does Lane Kiffin come in with his evaluation and like these guys and say, we feel like they fit our scheme, let's roll with what we have? Or does he say, clean slate, go into the portal and get 5 new starters? And I don't know what they're going to do. I don't think that's reasonable. But what I hope happens is, first, you convince Braylon Moore to come back. You convince Braylon Moore to come back. That's a great start. You have your center. And I do think a guy like Tyree Adams, Cohen Eccles, guys like that, Weston Davis, who's a 5-star. These are guys with ability who can be part of a rotation, if not immediate starters that are plug and play. But maybe you go into the portal and you try to get a tackle and a guard. So you'd have Braylon Moore at center. You try to get 1 tackle, 1 guard, and you let everybody else that's coming back compete for the remaining spots there. 1 tackle, 1 guard, and then you have your rotation as well. So I don't know exactly what path Lane Kiffin is going to follow here. Along with Glasscock, the Billy Glasscock, the GM. But what I do know is you have numbers and you have ability, physical ability. You don't have guys, and you have guys that have played a lot. You don't have guys that have played well. So can you maximize those guys, or are you going into the portal? It's going to be one of the more fascinating questions to watch, because the worst position on your group has to improve for the offense to function, and that's going to be a big charge. It's disappointing that the Carius Curne won't be a part of it. As we learn more about guys going into the transfer portal from LSU and potential targets for LSU, we'll be talking about it right here on Locked on LSU. So do us a favor, please smash that like button if you're on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app, rate us, leave a review, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked on LSU. It's your team every day.